The disappearance we're going to talk about today angers me. I have a feeling that when you are done listening to it, it will anger you too. It is about a very young wife and mother who just wanted to leave an abusive relationship, take her children, and create a better life for them. But she didn't realize the price she would ultimately pay. There are also details in this case that definitely resemble small town corruption. Let's talk about Christi Nichols. Christi Jo Williams was born on September 6, 1965. Her parents divorced when she was young, but she did grow up with a loving family that included a mother, Connie, stepfather, Greg, brother, Corey, sister, Cindy, as well as 3 stepbrothers. Family was very important to Christi, and she had always dreamed of becoming a mother. She graduated from Overton High School in 1983. She did attend a semester of college, but decided it wasn't for her. Christi also felt in her late teens that she didn't want to follow the rules at home, so she decided to move in with her paternal grandmother, Violet Williams, in the small town of Gothenburg, Nebraska. It was there that she would meet a man who would unfortunately change her life forever. I want to take this time to thank all the people who helped me gather the vast amount of information I have for the article and now the podcast. I've spoken to several people from the area who were there at the time. Some requested that I not mention them by name. Christi's family also talked with me at length about this case to give specific details about this case. This podcast is a combination of townspeople's recollections and rumors that have abounded over the years, old newspaper articles, and most importantly, Christi's family. You will hear from her family a little later in this podcast. I also want to mention that I reached out to the Gothenburg Police Department when I researched this disappearance for my original article, and they declined to speak with me at all about the case. Christi met Mark Nichols in the small town of Gothenburg, Nebraska, and they were married soon after. It seems their marriage was troubled from the start. Mark was domineering towards Christi and made sure he was in control at all times. Soon after their marriage, a daughter Lindsay was born in December of 1984, and in April of 86, a son Preston came along. By all accounts, motherhood really agreed with Christi. She was an extremely devoted mother who always put her children first, and she was so proud of them. Unfortunately, the marriage continued to struggle. Christi would often be seen with bruises and even had a few ER visits due to assaults. Christi does begin to open up to a family member about struggles she was going through in the months before she went missing, which leads me to our first guest. My next guest on the podcast is someone whom you might recognize if you watch the Unsolved Mysteries segment on Christi's disappearance. She was close to Christi and had some important and quite frankly chilling conversations with her not long before she disappeared. Welcome, Deborah Williams.
Thank you. I am very happy to be here and speak about Christi any chance I get.
Now, Deborah, you were interviewed on the Unsolved Mysteries segment, as I alluded to above. Tell us how you knew Christi and the kind of relationship that you two had.
Sure. Christi and I are cousins. Our fathers are brothers. Christi grew up in a town about 30 miles away, and because her mother and father divorced, her father moved out of state, and so I didn't see Christi as often as maybe cousins would if they lived in the same town.
Yeah.
When I did see her, it was typically with family events, holidays, usually at our grandmother Williams' home.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't really until she had married Mark and was pregnant with Lindsay that we had started visiting a little bit more. My grandmother would, ironically at the time, I was living in the town that she had grew up in, and so my grandmother would bring Lindsay and Christi to visit, and she was really pretty quiet, and I think that's kind of how a lot of people describe her, kind of quiet, shy. I didn't really speak up much. A lot of our conversations at that time were around the girls. We had girls that were 6 weeks apart, and that was really the majority of our kind of talking. I know Christi was a stay-at-home mom, stayed with the kids. When she had her son Preston, I had actually moved out of state, and so I wasn't in touch with her as much after I had moved.
Now, she would write you letters, right?
Yes, yes. And so it was after Preston was born and I was living out of state that she started writing me letters, and it was really in probably early 87, which was surprising to me. And as I look back at it, over the years, I realized she was really lonely, needing somebody to connect with. And I think because of our daughter's age, and just being a cousin, that she reached out to me. But in those letters, she really talked mostly about her kids, and then would begin sharing more about Mark, kind of indicating that he didn't like her to go out. She didn't have a car, as I mentioned, and stayed home with the kids. Most often, she was given an allowance. She had said he would check the receipts to see what she had bought. So really, the beginning signs of this classic domestic violence that was occurring. Interesting, her letters didn't indicate anything about so much about being scared as so much as being really unhappy and lonely.
And she did talk about a couple of instances of abuse, right? Just kind of matter-of-factly. And it was more in a frame to protect her children. Right, she was concerned what Lindsay had seen.
Yes. And so it was Thanksgiving that year, 1987, before she disappeared, that I had went back to visit family over the holiday. And Christi had, at that time, asked if I would go with her to the local lounge to have a drink. So I thought, yeah, that would be nice. And, I knew she was lonely, and I thought it would be good to go out with her. And again, kind of that very shy, very uncertain initially, but as kind of the conversation went on and driving her back to her home, I now realize, as I think about the conversation and I'm getting ready to drop her off, how desperate she was, and really couldn't find the words to say. I think she was really scared to go home. And as we stopped and she was going to get out of the car, she asked a question, which was really quite shocking. She asked if I thought Lindsay, who was not quite two, would remember seeing her father, Mark, choke her mother and stab a knife next to Christi's head as he held Christi up against the wall.
Oh, wow.
And I'm sure I just turned white. I was just shocked by that event happening, but also by the really kind of lack of concern for herself. She was worried about Lindsay seeing this.
Yeah.
And then she showed me this huge bruise. She lifted up her shirt on the left side of her body that was just covered in this bruise from another altercation that they had had.
Oh, wow. And she didn't even seem to have the right affect, right? She was just probably so used to it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, she was, I think, just desperate, wanting to figure out what do I do for my children?
Yeah.
And I was just shocked that something like that could happen. And so, in my complete ignorance of abuse at that time, I remember telling Christy, like, you need to get out of this marriage, and not realizing how difficult of a situation that she was in and how difficult it would be for her to get out.
Yeah. And then it was just a few weeks later that she did go missing, correct?
Right. Yeah.
So what did you think when
So,
you heard that she went missing?
initially I thought, well, I know she's unhappy. I know that there's so much going on. But after being gone even 24 hours, I knew something was really wrong, that something had happened. And just knowing everything that she had shared, knowing Mark's previous history, I just knew without a doubt that he had killed her.
Did you ever get a chance to speak with Mark? I know you didn't live close by, but
Right, not speak with Mark,
mm-hmm.
but I had went again back to Gothenburg that shortly after she went missing, and I'd lived in Denver, and so people go missing. People
Yeah.
go missing, and you hear on the news these searches that take place, or law enforcement investigations and things that happen. And this was a good little over a week. I had went back. My aunt Joanne was getting flyers made up, and I went back with her. We put up flyers. We went in and spoke with the chief of police, Shackleton, at the time. And again, my complete ignorance of not really picking up on or having confidence on what was going on, I will never forget speaking with him and saying, what are you doing? What's going on? Is there a search going on? And he stood there kind of rubbing his arms, stuttering, not really knowing what to say. And he made a comment about, well, it's snowing. There's snow on the ground. We're not going to be able to see anything. And so making excuses about why they weren't investigating, why they weren't doing anything. It was just sickening. It was just really sickening. The lack of concern about her not coming home. And then it quickly turned into, Mark kind of convincing everybody that she was unhappy in the marriage and she left. And I think that was the hardest part of all of that is knowing that no, Christi would never leave her children. She loved her children. She would do anything for them.
Yeah. What would you want my listeners to know about Christi?
I think just that she was a very selfless person. She was wanting more than anything to be a good mother, to give her children whatever she could, whatever they needed, and really being just stuck in this horrible marriage and not being so scared. And it's just really sad to kind of look back now and see whether it's the community or even myself, as I've said, the ignorance that I had at the time about what she really needed. And she was just not the kind of person that was going to speak up for herself. She was very kind, quiet, devoted, and there is not any way that she would ever leave her children. And that's just probably the worst part of all of this, is those children growing up without their mother. I know it's been devastating for them.
Yeah. Deborah, thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I know finding answers about Christi is very important to you, and you're always willing to do whatever you can to try to help. Take care.
Oh, yes, absolutely, absolutely. In fact, my career has largely been shaped by Christi's disappearance. So
How
I
so?
am very passionate.
How so?
When during Christi's disappearance, I had begun college to go to work or to get my degree in social work. Mm-hmm. I've always wanted to work with people, really understand people, help people. And when Christi's disappearance, this time, and seeing all that had taken place in the community, all the really what I feel is injustice that occurred, I changed my degree to criminal justice, thinking I would move on into, being a lawyer or whatever it might be. But it's been an amazing field in that understanding that side of the law. I've worked with different types of criminals and have learned a lot about domestic violence. I've worked as a volunteer in domestic violence shelters, and I've since moved on and gotten a degree in social work. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker and love to work with women, especially in life transitions, going through situations that they are stuck in, that they feel they don't have the power to move beyond, and offering support and guidance in that area.
Well, that is a great tribute to Christi that she helped in that career choice for you.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
But Deborah, thank you for your time, and we will stay in touch. Take care.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing. It really means a lot to our family.
My pleasure. I'll try to do a timeline as best I can for the 48 hours before Christi went missing based on Connie's account, because I feel it is very important. On December 9th, 1987, Christi went to go see attorney Claude Barackman, who had an office in Cozad, Nebraska, about 10 miles from Gothenburg. The lawyer recalls how scared Christi was and told him she wanted a divorce but didn't have the money. After viewing the bruises on her, he said they'd go ahead and get started anyway. He even encouraged Christi to not return home to Mark and said he would call her mother so she could stay there, but she declined. According to the attorney, he did call the Gothenburg police and reported some instances of abuse Christi had told him about. Christi made an appointment to come back to his office the next week, but he would never see his new client again. Some interesting information that I will mention is that, by all accounts, the police chief of Gothenburg, Bob Shackleton, and Mark Nichols' family were very good friends. So apparently, right after the phone call from the attorney to the Gothenburg Police Department reporting the abuse that was made, Mark Nichols found out. The one thing Christi was trying to avoid. We believe she went to work that day after her legal appointment, and when she goes to Mark's parents' home later that night, who had apparently been babysitting them while both parents worked, to pick up her children, she is told that she can't take them. Mark had found out about the lawyer she visited and was livid. Christi was panicked at the thought of not having her children and contacted the police and tried to file a police report, but Bob Shackleton told her Mark had the right to withhold them from her. She was also told to leave the property, and if she returned again, she'd be arrested. This was reportedly the third time that day alone Police Chief Shackleton had harassed Christi. He had also confronted her at the Jack and Jill store, according to the clerk who witnessed it, as well as on the street, which the chief later admitted to Connie, telling her something to the effect that she needed to get her act together with this thing with Mark. Christi was in a frantic situation now, and all she cared about was getting her children back. She calls Connie in a panic that night about her children being taken, and Connie says her and her husband will come right over there. Christi declined their offer, worried what her protective stepfather would do to Mark if he encountered him. The next day, December 10th, 1987, Christi calls her mother and tells her Mark has brought the children home. He had a list of ridiculous demands that she had to agree to in order to get them back. Some of them were the length of miles she could travel. He said he had taken her name off the bank accounts, so she had no money, and she had to stop the divorce proceedings. She wasn't allowed to take the children anywhere, and he told her if she left town, she would be arrested. Given how Shackleton had treated her thus far, she knew that was true, and would never see her children again. To his face, Christi agreed to his demands so she could have Lindsay and Preston back, but told her mother she would not be following Mark's rules. Christi was to meet with the abuse counselor later that day. Even with Mark's threats, she was determined to continue with it so she could take her children and escape this horrible marriage she was trapped in. Unfortunately, the abuse counselor Betty Coe met with Christi in, of all places, Police Chief Bob Shackleton's office. It appears that, once again, Mark Nichols was probably alerted as to what Christi was up to. The abuse counselor wasn't able to divulge everything about their meeting as it was confidential, but she did tell Connie that Christi needed to get out of the abusive situation she was in, and she had wanted her to go to a shelter that night. Christi declined and said she'd get her children and be back the next day to go to the safe house. But by the next day, she would be missing. So on the night of December 10th, 1987, Mark and Christi take their children and go out. The townspeople that saw them seemed a bit surprised they were out together, as it was known in the small town they weren't getting along. It is thought that Christi agreed to go out with him that night to try to keep things calm until she could take the kids and leave. They took the kids to Pizza Hut and then hired a teenage babysitter, Diane Jansen, to watch the children at their house for the rest of the evening. Mark and Christi then went to the bar, Pete's Place, where Christi worked and that Mark's uncle owned. His uncle recalls it was evident how stressful things were between them that night. He said they spent a few hours playing pool and shuffleboard before the bar closed at midnight. After they left the bar, the couple apparently stopped at the Jack and Jill convenience store in town, according to the clerk. He said Mark did some shopping, while Christi seemed very nervous and wanted to get somewhere, it seemed, and she just stayed around by the clerk talking to him. He said Mark bought some milk and breakfast items, and they left. That was the last time Christi Nichols was ever seen alive. Then Mark and the babysitter's stories differ greatly. When they arrived home, Mark claims that Christi came in the door a few steps ahead of him and marched right to the bathroom, where she stayed for 15 minutes and didn't go talk to the babysitter. Diane Jansen was adamant that only Mark arrived home that night. She only heard one car door, heard one set of shoes on the tile floor, and of course didn't see Christi. Mark paid her and she left. In one account, Mark claims him and Christi went to bed, and in another account, he says they stayed up until 2 a.m. arguing and then went to sleep. During this time frame, I do want to mention a pretty chilling sighting of Mark Nichols that appeared to be right around the time he returned to relieve the babysitter. I spoke to this person directly, but he wishes to remain anonymous. He was a teenager hanging out late at the park that night, as he often did, which was next door to the Nichols house. He spots Mark Nichols by the back of the house near his black pickup truck. Mark makes eye contact with him and starts angrily walking towards him. They get scared at how Mark is approaching him and yelling at him, and he walks away, not wanting any trouble. A few days later, he hears about the disappearance and realizes it was the same night he had that angry encounter with Mark Nichols. It has haunted him ever since. By the next morning, December 11th, 1987, Christi is unaccounted for. Mark then says he cleans out the car, but then his story differs greatly from Christi's grandmother, Violet Williams. According to the newspaper account, Mark says he was crying and upset as he drops his kids off for her to watch. However, Christi's grandmother said he didn't say one word to her about Christi being missing or even asked her if she had seen or heard from her granddaughter. He just dropped the kids off at 11 a.m. and then picked them up about 2.5 hours later. It is unknown what all Mark Nichols was doing during that time. He did apparently go try to file a missing persons report for his wife, but given she had only been missing a few hours, he was unable to do so. Even though Christie's family was now starting to get worried about where she was, and at the time they lived a few hours away, Mark Nichols was keeping himself quite busy. Literally, the day his wife goes missing, he takes their children and moves out of their house and in with his parents. He then forges Christie's name on the titles and sells their Ford Pinto and Mercury Cougar, leaving him with a black pickup truck. There were a few full-scale searches for Christi with hundreds of volunteers, but according to her mother, Mark nor his family participated or tried in any way to help find her daughter. Mark wanted people to believe she left him and abandoned their children, but that seemed very unlikely. If she were just going to flee on her own, she wouldn't have bothered to see the attorney or the abuse counselor. It was also reported that Christi may have had a boyfriend around that time. It was even stated in a newspaper article that there was a note found under the seat of Christie's car to this mystery man that read, "I want you to know I will probably be leaving after Christmas, and I will try not to see or talk to you until then. It will all work out somehow. I'm really sorry." There was a name mentioned around town of someone that Christi was thought to be seeing. He was nice enough to speak with me, and I agreed not to mention his name. He did say that he and Christi only went out one time a few weeks before she disappeared, and it was something that he regretted. He said there was nothing serious between them, and it is unknown if he was the person the note was intended for or if there could have been someone else. Now I want you to hear one of the people most affected by this disappearance, and that is Christi's mother. She has lived with this heartbreak for over 36 years and is willing to talk about that terrible time in her life. Okay. Hello, Connie. I wanted to tell my listeners that I have Christi Nichols' mother, Connie, on the podcast today. I am so glad that you've agreed to speak with me. I want my listeners to know how difficult it has been for you all these years since your daughter's disappearance and all the efforts you have done to try to find her. So first, tell us what kind of daughter Christi was, and what would you want the listeners to know about your daughter?
Christi was a very timid, shy person. It took her a long time to make friends, but when she did, they were friends forever. And she loved her little brother and sister. She was the most excited big sister you ever seen when they came along. And she loved animals. We took her to my mother's, a friend of theirs, who was a single man, had never married, and was a bachelor, and he and his brother and sister-in-law raised chihuahuas. And he had a little chihuahua that he got from, he raised it from a baby, and it was only around him. It was a long-haired, beautiful little chihuahua. He had to go into a care home, and he knew that I had wanted the grandmother years before, so he asked if I would take her, and we were so excited. Christi was we went all the way to Cozad, got the dog, and all the way home I told her to be really careful because she'd never been around little kids, and she was like 4.5. And I said, she's not used to you. You have to let her. The next morning, I'm in the shower, and I hear her talking to someone. I thought, good grief, who's here? Here she has this little 5-pound dog in her doll dress, in her stroller, giving it a ride. And they were joined at the hip forever.
That's so sweet.
So she just loved animals. She loved people. She just was really shy. And
so we'll fast forward to when she was dating Mark. Was Mark the first person that Christi dated?
Basically, I think he was the first one she ever dated. Seriously, she had some health issues, a back brace and things in high school, and she just didn't date anybody.
And being shy.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts on him, and did they change after Christi and him got married?
Well, she was just a young girl, just out of school, and he'd been married and divorced, and he was older, and the same concerns that you have about any child when they go to get married. You want them to pick someone that'll last and be good,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Did Christi ever talk to you about her marriage or any problems that were going on in her early years being married?
She really didn't say much, but I think she was trying hard to make it work, and you know, she didn't want to admit that. And you know, by then they had a couple kids, you know, and
Yeah.
she, you know, was just trying to make it work, I think, and she didn't want to say anything, of course, because you know, she kind of knew we would prefer she married someone else, probably, and as most people, you don't like to admit you've made a mistake.
Do you know personally of any abuse that occurred between Mark and Christi? Like, did she tell you anything?
I seen bruises, and I would ask her, and she'd say, "Oh, I ran into this." She was kind of a clumsy little girl,
Yeah.
and I ran into this, or I bumped into that, you know. And Greg one day said, "No," he said, "if he's not treating you right," he said, "I want to know." He said, "You can't, you know, you don't need to put up with that." And she said, "Oh, no, everything's fine." But the last time she came to our house was a few months before. It was in the fall, late fall, but it was still nice weather. She came up with the kids and stayed a couple days. And when they were getting ready to leave, it was a warm day, and we went out, and she got the kids buckled up in the back seat, and she was standing by the car, and we were talking, and she just didn't act like she wanted to go. And finally I said, just, you know, I looked in at the kids, and I said, "Well, why don't you guys just stay here?" I said, "Lindsay, you could sleep in Aunt Cindy's room, and Preston, you could sleep in Uncle Corey's room, and Mommy could sleep in the spare room, and you could just stay here with us." And she just got this really look on her face. And she said, "Oh, what would Daddy say if we did that?" You know, and then she stood there for a little while longer, and finally they left. And so I knew things weren't going well. So I had called her grandmother on her dad's side, and I asked her if she thought he was being abusive, and she said, "Oh, she just needs to settle down and be married," and didn't say much. So I didn't know at that time for sure, but I pretty much, in fact, you know, the day that I couldn't reach her, I thought, well, he's beating her so bad he doesn't want her talking to me on the phone. Is my first thought, you know.
Yeah.
But it didn't take much longer before I realized that no, she wasn't there.
So now, I mean, you've pretty much alluded to it, but Christi was a very devoted mother, correct?
Oh my gosh, yes, she was just her children were her whole life. There's no way in any scenario she would have left those children behind.
Yes.
Absolutely none. I have no doubt about that.
Now, did you know that Christi was planning a divorce? And if so, what did she ever say to you in those regards?
I knew she was when Mark took the children and put them with his parents and wouldn't let her get them after work.
Yeah. She called you.
Yes, she did. Yeah. And then the next day she met with an attorney. And then the next time she called was in the evening. I think it was probably the day before they went out.
Yeah, I was going to say, when was the last time that you spoke to Christi, and what was your conversation?
I called her after Mark had gone to work in the evening, and she says, "No, Mark got the kids back, and he says as long as I don't leave town and don't do anything, he's taken my name off of the checking, and I have no money, and as long as I just do exactly what he says."
And she wasn't allowed to leave town, correct? He was going to check the mileage.
Town. She didn't have a checkbook. She didn't have anything. At least that's what he said. And so she said, I said, "Well, you can't live like that." And she said, "No, I'm going to see the attorney." And so she did.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess she saw the attorney when he had the kids out of the house and she couldn't get to them. And then the next day he brought them back, and that's when he told her she had to follow all these orders. And so I called her that night and told her she couldn't do that. Well, the next day she met with Betty Cole from Lexington. She was with, she did domestic abuse counseling. Mm-hmm. And she had met with Betty in Lexington, but Betty came to Gothenburg, and of course, guess where they met was in the chief of police's office.
The worst place she could have met.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that was the night. Then I called later than that evening. I thought he'd be at work again the next night to see if she talked to the attorney and whatever. And the babysitter answered and said, "Oh, they've gone out for the evening." And that right away struck me as odd.
Yeah, the verge of divorce, but they're going to go out and buy Christmas presents.
If you have a major fight with your spouse, the last thing you want to do is go out the next day.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the next morning then I thought, well, I'm going to call her. I was driving a bus for South Platte schools, and we had a place that we were going, and was supposed to do that. So I called in the morning about 7 o'clock, and Mark answered the phone, and I said, "Hi, Mark, how you doing?" I said, "Can I talk to Christi a minute?" And he said, "Oh, she's asleep." He said, "We were out last night and it was late." He said, "She's asleep." I said, "Oh, okay, well, have her call me." And I hung up, and I just immediately dialed another number, which was a friend of mine that knew Christi. And I said, "Would you call Christi?" And she said, "Yeah," because she knew there was problems. And she called, and within 6 minutes, she called me back, and she says, "Well, he says she's uptown shopping." Well, then I knew we were in serious trouble.
Yeah.
Because Christi not only was shy and timid, she really wasn't a speedy person. For her to get out of bed and get dressed and get uptown in 7 or 8 minutes.
Yeah, and left her children there.
That wasn't going to happen, you know.
Yeah, so you pretty much knew that next morning when you couldn't track her down.
When I called, the sheriff's or the police department in Gothenburg and started calling different things, and so that's when I knew that she had gone for divorce, and then he obviously found out.
And didn't Mark try to report her missing, and they told him it hadn't been long enough?
Well, he tried. The next day he called me, or when I called, he said, "Well, she's gone. She abandoned her kids and she's gone." And I said, I guess I don't remember what I said. I was just, in shock. And well, I guess after we both called, and we called back later, and he said, "No, she's just abandoning the kids." And so I knew, something wasn't right there. But that's when we started calling around, to the police and things. And I got to run around everywhere I went in Gothenburg.
Yeah. Did you ever, confront Mark about Christi's disappearance, and do you suspect that he's responsible? Pretty much know the answer.
Yes, I'm about as sure as anything in my life that he's responsible. And yes, I confronted him several times, and he just said she abandoned her kids and she's gone, and now, they're my kids. And
wow. And another thing, this doesn't seem to be widely known, but Mark Nichols was married before Christi, and there were accusations of abuse in his first marriage. They actually had a son together. And tell us what you know about how she was able to get out of her marriage with Mark and the conversation you had with the mother of Mark's first wife.
Well, I by then I knew that that was why his first marriage broke up. Seemed to be common knowledge.
The abuse, yeah.
And so I finally, I called the mother and I told her who I was and what I was just wondering if she was able to give us any insight. She says, "I'm not going to talk about that." And she was just very, very blunt and whatever. And I said, "Well, how would you feel if this had been your daughter and you couldn't find her?"
Yeah.
And she stopped for a minute and she says, "Well, I can tell you this, he's a very evil man. But she said, if you try to get her to testify, we'll send her out of the country."
Wow.
And I said, "Well, okay." I said, "Thank you very much." And I hung up because she wasn't going to say anything. Apparently, that contract must have been ironclad.
So your understanding was Mark really kind of gave up the rights to the son and everything just to make the abuse allegations and everything go away.
That's what Christi told me. They were going to file charges against him for abuse and assault, whatever else. And apparently they had a good case, and they decided it would be better to take the boy and get him away from Mark.
And Christi told you this?
Christi told me this, yes.
Wow.
She said that Mark's parents had been very upset because he had lost the little boy.
And so Mark had already lost one wife and one child due to claims of abuse, is what I want to put out there as well.
That's what I was told, yes.
Okay, tell us about the custody issues and the legal issues that happened with Mark and his family after Christi went missing.
Well, after she was missing, we would get the kids on the weekend the first few weeks because, well, I really don't know how we started it right away, but we ended up with them on the weekends for a while. And then finally, when they realized that there was enough evidence that he probably killed their mother, the judge, they went to the judge, and he gave custody of both Lindsay and Preston to my husband Greg and I.
Mm-hmm.
And we had them for about a year. And we went to court about every 3 weeks.
And now there was something about recordings that Mark was upset about.
When we had them, he would call and talk to the kids. Well, they were 2 and 3 and didn't speak very plain. And several times he'd be asking Lindsay something, and I had a tape recorder, and I had it on finally because I couldn't. Well, I guess I better go back. I asked a lawyer, "Can I tape these conversations?" Just simply because he would ask. Well, one particular instance, he was asking her what she wanted, and he was going to send her something. What did she want? And she kept saying My Little Pony. Well, he couldn't understand her, and she was getting madder and madder because she'd say it over and over, and he wouldn't get it. So finally, I just took the phone and said, she's telling you she wants a My Little Pony. And he said, oh, so I had already asked. They said, no, as long as you have full custody at this point, you can do whatever. So apparently he must have known I was listening then, because we got subpoenaed, Greg and I both, for $10,000 a piece for taping conversations. So we went, we had to go to court for that. And it cost, we had attorney's fees and all this stuff. Of course, the judge, after we had hired an attorney and spent money, he looked at the case after they even had a jury lined up, and he said, there's absolutely no basis for this. He said, I'm dropping everything. And that was the end of that.
Yeah.
And then, so anyway, we continued to have the kids until the next end of the year, I guess. And but we went back to court every, like I say, 2 or 3 weeks, because they were trying to get custody of the kids. Mark's folks were, and it didn't work. And then we had a party that had contacted the judge, and once they contacted the judge, he recused himself, and that was the end of that. Had we kept that judge, I think we'd have kept the kids forever, because he knew he was guilty of sin. But anyway, then the next judge, they finally placed him closer to Gothenburg, and then they ended up back at Mark's folks. And finally, I guess they went back to Mark's folks when the new judge that they had said, he said, I think he's guilty of sin, but either file charges or get the kids back with him. So that's what happened with the kids. And of course, then we were getting them on the weekends, because I think he felt like he had to, or I don't know, somebody maybe told him he had to let us see him on the weekend, have him on the weekends. But then after, when he started dating that other gal, he says, they have a new mother, they don't have anything to do with you now. And then it wasn't very long after that they got married. Not long after that, when they left the state in the middle of the night, when he got her out of the safe house.
Now, what would happen when you would send gifts after he had moved away?
Well, we would send gifts, but I took Preston's birthday gift down one on his birthday, and I had my cousin and another friend went along. We were in the car at the park with the kids, and everybody had presents for Preston. We had a little party, and Lindsay, who was, I don't know, 3, 4, she said, "See, Preston, Grandma does too love you."
Oh, wow.
And so I know whatever we sent that we didn't personally hand him, probably he took credit for,
Yeah. So about Mark's third wife, now you heard a story about Mark and her as far as abuse from the Nebraska State Police. Tell us what they told you.
Well, the 2 investigators that were really involved in this case in the beginning had shared most things with us that they could. And they called me and said, "I think we've got him now. He beat his wife now, and she's in the safe house, and she's going to testify against him and whatever." And so we thought, well, that's at least maybe we'll find out. And so the next thing I know, he had gotten the phone number from the safe house and called her and begged her to forgive him, and he'd never do it again. And she agreed, and she left the safe house, and they left in the middle of the night and went to Arkansas. So that was the last time they were here.
So Mark was able to get the phone number of the safe house.
Yes, he was.
Wow.
And that's pretty hard to do.
Yeah.
Usually only law enforcement that has that.
Or someone that's well connected with law enforcement.
So,
what has your relationship been with the Gothenburg Police Department and Nebraska State Police over the years?
Well, the only person I dealt with, the Gothenburg Police, was the chief of police, and I wouldn't give you a plug nickel for anything he ever did.
Yeah.
He was absolutely hindering, not helping.
Yeah.
But the state patrol, with the exception of the one trooper that was stationed in Gothenburg, they were a very dedicated, hardworking group, and they all believed in their hearts that he was guilty of sin, and they all tried everything they could think of to resolve this, and they still are as much as they can at this point in time. But I think they've done everything they can do, and they're still doing things when something comes up,
Yeah. Now, you actually recorded every phone call with those over the years, correct?
I had tapes of all the phone calls that I made to the Gothenburg chief of police and to the state patrol officer that was stationed there. And I gave them all to the state patrol, and they asked me if I wanted to file charges against them. And of course, at that time, we just finally gotten the state patrol investigators involved. Felt like we were maybe gaining ground, and the last thing I wanted to do was for them to divert their time to, go after him.
Yeah.
The damn done there, so just leave him alone and do something that'll help me. But they weren't very helpful. I would call them and ask them if they'd done such and such, and they would tell me, they didn't think it was necessary, or else they'd done something and it was a damn dirty job, and they didn't think they should have had to do it. They just, the conversations were terrible from what,
So, sadly, we all have a very good idea that Christi is no longer alive. I know at this point you would really like to have her remains to bury in the family plot. Now, you told me something about when you visit the grave of your late husband that I would like you to share with the listeners.
Well, when my husband died, we had talked about what we were going to do. So the tombstone has his name and my name on the front side. On the back side, we listed his 3 children behind him and my 3 behind me. And so when I go to the cemetery now, I put flowers on the front for Greg, and I put flowers for Christi. And this year I put flowers for my stepson, who also passed away this year. So
I'm sorry.
We put flowers there.
So it's like you're visiting her grave. We just haven't found her.
So there's just not much you can do. It's hard.
Connie, it's been an honor to have you on this podcast. Your determination and effort put forth in trying to find your daughter for all these years is truly something to be admired. I sincerely hope you can one day get the answers that you're looking for. Thank you, and we'll stay in touch.
Thank you. I appreciate you putting this out there for people to hear, and hopefully somebody somewhere can give us an insight into something.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Bye.
Bye. There were a few things that were happening around that time Christi went missing that are worth mentioning. First off, there was a major construction project going on around them, and an overpass was being built. They had dug deep caissons in order to pour the concrete. I found a comment in an old newspaper article on Christi's disappearance from the head of the roads department, Merle Bergman, and he said, "A tremendous amount of gravel fill used at both locations and remained uncovered during the winter of 87 and 88. I imagine that something could have been buried in that gravel late at night, and the next morning you'd never be able to see that there had been any digging." Another very interesting bit of information is that Mark Nichols' parents were pouring a concrete pad on their property in Gothenburg just a few days after Christi's disappearance. I was indirectly in contact with someone who was there when the project was going on, and he said it was obvious the sand had been messed with and had to be redone before the concrete could be poured. His parents then put a garage on top of the pad. It was also stated in a newspaper article that some lye had been stolen during that time from a nearby farmer's co-op. Could the stolen lye and the new floor being laid at the Nichols property be related to Christi's disappearance? Christi's family did everything they could think of to try to find their daughter. They hired a PI, Dennis Whalen, soon after her disappearance, who worked tirelessly to try to find her. When he was given access to Mark and Christi's house weeks after she went missing, he was surprised at what he found. Under the laundry basket in their bedroom was an area of blood. It appeared to be small, but when it was cut out and sent for testing, it ended up being around the size of a cup saucer and was enough to soak through the pad to the floorboard. Mark claimed it was menstrual blood, but tests determined it was not, and that it did belong to Christi. The state police were then brought into the case. Terry Aarons and Mel Messersmith, according to Connie, worked very hard to try to find Christi. She believes if they were given the case right away, it would have had a resolution to it. She had grown untrusting of the Gothenburg Police Department from day one in how they handled the case. They treated her poorly, and she still to this day has kept every recording of her calls with them and called them every day initially. Her and her husband also depleted both of their retirement funds and spent well over $100,000 in order to try to find their daughter. They did absolutely everything they could think of to find her, but sadly it wasn't enough. The PI also contacted Unsolved Mysteries, and they agreed to air the case. It included interviews with the ER doctor, who interestingly enough was the wife of Police Chief Bob Shackleton, Connie and Debbie, Attorney Barrickman, as well as an on-camera interview from Mark Nichols where he tried to convince everyone he wasn't a violent person, and a ridiculous on-camera plea for his wife to contact her family. The segment prompted 150 calls to the telecenter and 15 calls to the Nebraska State Police, but unfortunately nothing came of any of the tips. Then in March of 1988, there was hope that a clue had surfaced in Christi's disappearance. At the Maxwell rest stop, about 25 miles from Gothenburg, a trucker found Christi's blue suitcase. It had a few random items belonging to her inside, which Mark had precisely detailed months earlier as things his wife supposedly took with her. It also appeared that the suitcase had been carefully placed there, and Terry Aarons was quoted as saying, "We don't know if it was put there to throw us off the trail or put us on the trail." After Christi went missing, Mark had custody of the children initially. Connie and her husband continued to come every few weeks and have visits with them. Then in February, when the state police got the case, they arranged for Christi's parents to take custody of the kids as Mark was under suspicion for his wife's disappearance. Mark was absolutely furious at his in-laws having custody, would drag them into court every few weeks for various reasons. After he divorced Christi in 1990 on abandonment grounds, he soon after married his third wife. He then told Christi's parents they had a mom now and didn't need to see them anymore, and Christi's parents reluctantly, to stop the children from being repeatedly questioned and harassed by Mark, thought it was best that they didn't press. I will mention that according to Christie's family, soon after Mark moved to North Platte with his children and after marrying his third wife, he was arrested at one point and charged with domestic violence in regards to her, but I was unable to find out what happened with those charges. I believe soon after they left the state. Now I want to share a copy of a letter that I received after I wrote my original article in 2019. It is a letter from Attorney Barrickman that was hand-delivered to the Gothenburg Police Department in 2011. It basically tells what Christie's divorce attorney thought about Mark Nichols and his desire that action could be taken in Christie's disappearance. Here it is.
I am the out-of-town attorney Christi came to after she had been beaten and bruised by Mark on December 10th, 1987. She displayed to me all of the bruises Mark had inflicted on her, and he had bent her thumb on her left hand the wrong way back to her arm. She was in tears, so I called Jim O'Rourke, Dawson County Attorney, and Gary Reber, Dawson County Sheriff. We also notified the Nebraska State Patrol, who assigned the case initially to Terry Ahrens. Christi disappeared that night, and Mark reported her missing to Bob Shackleton, Gothenburg Chief of Police, the morning of the 12th. Connie Stanley, Christi's mother, who I believe still lives in Big Spring, Nebraska, called and Mark lied to her and told her Christi was still sleeping in their waterbed. She worked evenings at Bert and Earl's bar in Gothenburg. Mark had taken her to Dr. Carol Shackleton, who examined her injuries, and of course, Mark denied inflicting these injuries, although Christi told the doctor that Mark had, in fact, intentionally abused and injured her. When everyone began the search for Christi, Mark took their daughter and son to Violet Williams, Christi's grandmother, who has passed on, according to Matt Williams, president of the Gothenburg State Bank. Joanne Niss, Violet's daughter, moved to Omaha with Dennis Whelan, investigator who worked on the case extensively. In the possession of the four of us, Herb Compton, PI, Dennis Whelan of Omaha, Terry Ahrens, retired Nebraska State Police investigator, and the undersigned are 19 specific items of physical evidence proving that Mark killed his wife. In the Nebraska State Police North Platte evidence storage space are the Chevy vehicle that he drove her dead body to its resting place in, plastic with her blood smeared all over it, the carpet next to her side of the waterbed soaked with her blood, the suitcase Mark filled with her clothing, described by him in detail, left by Mark at the Brady westbound rest area in this pathetic effort to lead us to believe she had, somehow, headed west, leaving her suitcase at the rest area. I have pleaded, in vain, with both Jim O'Rourke and Liz Waterman, Dawson County attorneys, to impanel the grand jury to preserve this evidence. Nebraska State police officers having knowledge of the case are Marv Strong, David Elliott, Stuart Corns, and Bob Anderson. When the Unsolved Mysteries cast came here, Wendy Bailey and Julie Talon, both whom NBC learned much of the evidence filmed in the segment. Robert Stack portrayed the facts that, summarized, led to the only conclusion that Mark murdered Christi. People in the Gothenburg area were intimidated by Lowell Nichols, Mark Nichols' father, and most possible witnesses told law enforcement officials they didn't want to get involved. Marion Tatum, retired and former officer of the First State Bank of Gothenburg, told me that Mark and Lowell were dangerous because his daughter was Mark's first wife and Mark abused her physically and mentally. Gary Norsine, still a Dawson County deputy sheriff, also participated in the investigation and has knowledge of the facts and evidence. Mark would be close to 60 years of age today, and he moved with Christi's 2 children to Northwest Arkansas. The FBI has information as to his whereabouts, although it is cold, as is the entire case. I will, and I know Herb, Dennis, and Terry will also help in any way possible to get this case to court, as, of course, there is no statute of limitations on murder. There is even a movie based upon the true story of Christi Joe's murder entitled When No One Would Listen. In my judgment, there was too much concentration upon searching for the body because Mark can and will be prosecuted and convicted beyond any reasonable doubt when the case is presented to a jury. Claude E. Barrickman.
There is one more person I want to talk to in this podcast, and it is about how this case has affected him and the efforts he has put forth to keep Christi's story out there. The guest I'm going to talk to about Christi's disappearance is probably not a name you've heard associated with her case, but he's been a vital part in some ways, and I wanted to have him on here to talk about his efforts. Welcome Tyler Beesing to this podcast.
Hello.
So Tyler, let me do a little background on how we met years ago. If I remember correctly, you reached out to me years ago when I initially wrote my article on Christi's disappearance for my blog. You were glad that her case was getting more attention, and we've stayed in touch ever since. You were basically a concerned citizen from Gothenburg who this case has always stuck with, but you went a step further than that. Tell my listeners why this case has stayed on your mind and all the efforts you've made over the years to try to get answers for the family.
This case has really just stuck with me. It's such a small community. We've got just over 3,000 people here. We don't just have people disappear. I've hung up a bunch of missing posters in all of the local businesses, including the business that Mark Nichols' sister owns, which is the liquor store here in town. Which, of course, that poster only stayed up for not quite a day. It disappeared, but I make Facebook posts fairly frequently, and I've had some few tips come in through that way, and I let the state patrol office know, and just try to gather as much information as I can to see if we can get some closure on our case.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, you and I are doing the same thing. I've taken cold cases and gotten them more attention via my blog and now the podcast. You are basically doing the same thing with Christi's disappearance. What is it about the disappearance that has stuck with you?
It's local to me. It's my hometown. I've been born and raised here. And my dad had actually lived just a few houses away from Mark and Christi before they had moved to their last home together on Lake Avenue. And he could hear them arguing with each other quite frequently. And it's a case where my family had known who she was, and it just kind of has bothered me quite a lot. And I just trying to do what I can to find her.
Now, you've reached out to some of Christi's family, correct? How has your interaction with them been?
My interaction with them has always been very positive. I spoke with Connie, Cindy, Corey, Lindsay, and they're all amazing. I've gone and actually visited Connie at her home, and she is an absolute doll. She is a sweetheart.
Yeah, I agree.
Always willing to chit chat with me. We get a hold of each other at random points. We'll talk on the phone for an hour or so, just talking about anything and everything. They're a very sweet family.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts or theories on her disappearance? I know there's one obvious theory that's always out there.
Yeah. I don't think she just ran off and disappeared like her family still her ex's family claims still happen.
Yeah.
I know Mark's family still seems to want to say that she ran off. I don't believe that at all. I do think Mark is behind her disappearance, but I'm always willing to listen to anything that comes through. Maybe he didn't, maybe he did, but any information I'll take and investigate within my abilities and pass on to those who are able to do more with it than I can.
Yeah. In your opinion, what is the general feeling on Christi Nichols' disappearance in Gothenburg?
A lot of people think that Mark is responsible for Christi's disappearance, including myself. I think that's kind of the general thought. I know a lot of people think she was placed in a driveway that was bored shortly after she disappeared. And there's another theory that she's in the viaduct that was poured around the same time that she had disappeared. So.
Well, Tyler, I think it's great all the effort you have put into keeping Christi's story alive there. Hopefully you will continue to do that, and I'm sure you join me in hoping Christi's family can get the answers they so deserve.
No, absolutely.
All right, thanks for appearing on here.
All right, thank you.
Now it is time for my thoughts on this case. I absolutely believe Mark Nichols is responsible for the disappearance of his wife, Christi. He had the means, motive, and opportunity to commit the crime. He knew that, despite his threats and intimidation, Christi was determined to end their abusive relationship. Mark knew he was going to lose his marriage and possible custody of his children, and he couldn't let that happen. If Christi were allowed to leave, this would be the second time he would lose his wife and children due to abusive claims in the relationship. Mark had eyes all over Gothenburg and seemed to know everything Christi was up to, and he was the last person known to be with her. I believe he killed her sometime after they left the convenience store and buried her somewhere where he believed she would never be found. Mark also posted a photo on his Facebook page in 2016 that he has since removed, but there is a screenshot of it on my original article. It is a widely circulated meme that is supposed to be humorous, and it says, "Ditch her quick and hide, divorce lawyers." Given his second wife went missing while trying to file for divorce, I think the fact that he has posted it as a joke on his page is, at the least, in very poor taste. Mark Nichols is a free man to this day. He's never been charged or had to spend a day in jail for anything he may have done in relation to his wife's disappearance. There was a little bit of an update that I wanted to share. I don't know any specific details or what prompted law enforcement to finally do this, but earlier this month, June of 2024, police did dig up the concrete floor of the garage where Mark Nichols' parents lived at the time of Christi's disappearance. Remember that I stated earlier they had poured a new floor shortly after their daughter-in-law's disappearance. I do know that Christi's remains were not found in the search. However, I'm glad to see that Christi's case is not forgotten by Nebraska State Police, and they continue to work towards a resolution. Christi Nichols had a plan. She was trapped in a violent relationship and was trying to get out. She was doing everything the right and, she thought, the safest way. She would end her marriage and take her children and leave town. If she had planned on abandoning her marriage and children both, the attorney and abuse counselor meeting wouldn't have been necessary. There was only one thing stopping Christi from going through with the plan: a controlling husband who was about to lose control. Christi's life was very important, and just because she's been gone for more than 35 years doesn't make it less so. She left behind 2 children and many family and friends who loved her and still miss her. Her mother summed it up best when she said, "I want people to remember this. I want people to think about it." Could the fact that Christi wanted out of a violent relationship and was willing to uproot her and her children's lives to get out of it make her marked for murder? That concludes my podcast on Christi Nichols. If you liked it, please feel free to leave me a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find my podcast on Amazon Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. It is one word, Lost and Found Podcast. I post a new episode every 2 weeks. As always, you can find all of my articles, as well as links to my most recent podcast episodes, on my website at Lost and Found Blogs. You can reach me at lostandfoundpodcast@yahoo. And remember that cold cases stay cold because their story stops getting told.